Good to see you guys again. Good evening. Again, we have an esteemed panel here, and the first thing I'm going to do is introduce our moderator. Jordyn Holman is a business reporter covering retail for the New York Times. She previously worked at Bloomberg News. During her time at Bloomberg, she wrote the Bloomberg Business Week cover story on Ben & Jerry's corporate activism during the 2020 summer protests and reported on labor movements at major companies. Her year-long reporting on the Buy Black movement, which documented the shift of U.S. consumers purchasing more frequently from Black-owned businesses, has been recognized by the Society for Advancing Business Editing and Writing, which is SABU, and the National Association of Black Journalists. The Chicago native studied journalism at the University of Southern California. And Jordyn, come on out, and you will hear her introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Good job.
Hey guys. Okay, I'm Jordyn. So I will be introducing the panel. But before I do that, so what we really want to get out of this discussion today is about how Black-owned businesses are launched, find the money to expand, and then hopefully become household names. And in this discussion, we want to demystify the process of how they get funding and to really get into the mechanics of what we mean when we say Black-owned businesses need more paths to raise capital. For example, a recent stat from Shopify found that 44% of Black entrepreneurs said they find it difficult to find funding. And almost 2/3 say they find it challenging to receive grants. Luckily, we have an all-star panel to help us dig into this important topic. Okay, so I am introducing Dr. Rachel M.B. Atkins. She's an assistant professor of economics at St. John's University, Tobin College of Business. Her research examines racial inequality in entrepreneurship, employment, innovation, tech industries, and public policies. There's one other fact, guys. She's a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan, so we're sorry about that game. We're here for you. Okay. Roy Swan leads the Ford Foundation's Mission Investments team, managing a portfolio of investments and working to expand the impact investing field. Before joining the Ford Foundation, he worked at various financial institutions like Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and Harvard Bancorp, the nation's largest African-American managed bank, as well as being CFO of New York City's Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. Well, now we have Everette Taylor. He's CEO of Kickstarter, the crowdfunding platform that focuses on bringing creative projects to life. Kickstarter has founded more than 230,000 projects, and more than $7.1 trillion has been funded for various projects since it began in 2009. Companies like Oculus, Peloton, and the shoe company Allbirds have been funded by Kickstarter. And Everette himself is deeply experienced in building and growing successful businesses as a founder, CEO, and chief marketing officer. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Denise Woodard. She is founder and CEO of Partake Foods, a natural food company that she was inspired to launch because of her daughter's food allergies. In January, Partake Foods announced that it had become a certified B Corporation, which is a designation that recognizes organizations that have met high standards of performance, accountability, and transparency. And Woodard is the first Black woman to raise more than $1 million publicly for a food startup in the consumer packaged goods field. So thank you for joining us. And by the way, you guys have a chance to ask them all questions, so start thinking about your questions before we open for Q&A. But Roy, I want to start with you, since you've been working in the public and private space looking at opportunities for underserved communities. So when you kind of think about the largest changes for opportunities for Black-owned businesses, what are the changes that you see for private sector and public sector?
Yeah. First of all, great to be here. Nice seeing everyone. And I will tell you that I am more excited about this moment that we're in than any other time I've been in professional life, and that was beginning back in 1986. And that's especially true for underrepresented businesses. From what I've observed historically in this country, there have been periods of events that have stirred up energy around the underserved and underrepresented. And the big moment in the US that I recall was in the late 60s when the Nixon administration came out with its black capitalism programs. And those were ambitious and short-lived. The next big cycle came after the Rodney King incident. Lots of promises made, not sure how many were kept, and that moment also dissipated relatively quickly. We're in a moment now where a lot of people can point to sort of George Floyd as the tragic situation, the murder, as another wake-up call. A lot of promises have been made, still yet to be seen how many will be kept, but the momentum feels longer and stronger. And I think it's up to everyone who has interest to keep the momentum going by doing their part, and that's got entrepreneurs up, you got everything up here represent various areas of the ecosystem. But I'm excited about the possibilities. There's a lot of capital out there. More is needed, but I'm feeling good about things.
And Denise, I want to go to you since you have started a business. You started Partake in 2016, I believe.
Yep.
And oftentimes, if a Black person is going the entrepreneurial route, it takes great sacrifice to do so. So I read that when you were starting Partake, you maxed out your credit card, you cashed out your 401k, you sold your engagement ring.
Wow.
And obviously that came with great success. I buy Partake cookies in Target. But after you used your personal funds and used as much as you could, did you know the next place that you could go to get funding? And if so, like what was it? Can you break that down?
So I didn't go all in day one. Initially, it was just a little bit from my 401k, and then we were seeing positive business results that gave me the faith to take a little bit more. And at the same time, I was trying to raise outside capital, but I wasn't having much luck. I didn't speak the language. I wasn't in the networks. I didn't know where to go. And so that caused me and my family to have to really sacrifice and invest personally to the extents that you shared. The next place we turned actually was Kickstarter. We ran a Kickstarter campaign, and it was twofold. It was because we needed to raise capital for the business, but to grow the business, I also needed an allergy-friendly manufacturing facility, and there's not very many that exist in the US, and the one that I wanted to work with was working with very large national brands, and I thought, well, I'll show them. And so we ran a Kickstarter campaign to show them that someone besides me and my family thought that this business should exist. And so that gave us the initial seed capital to run the business. And that was, in the fall of 2017, at which point I started the business in a very small, manageable way because I knew that given my background, it was going to be very hard for me to raise capital. And so for the first year, I just sold cookies out of my car to natural food stores in New York. We got a call from Whole Foods and from Wegmans kind of within a couple weeks of each other, about a year into doing that in the summer of 2018. And that required additional outside capital. And so we had to start trying to raise money. And we did that through a plethora of ways that I'm excited to talk about tonight.
And before we go to you, let's bring in Kickstarter. So there's this idea of the friends and family round. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to raise money, you go to your network. And so oftentimes you talk about, Black people don't have the same networks of people with the same wealth as white people do. So Everette, do you see Kickstarter as like a substitute for entrepreneurs who just don't have access to friends and family rounds? Like, how do you kind of position it within this financing world?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit half and half. Like, Denise will tell you, like, Kickstarter is still a grind. Like it's still, you still got to be able to go out to your community, your people, have a go-to-market strategy, and all of these things is really, really important. Some people think you can go on Kickstarter and literally just launch a project and people just want to give you money. There's an algorithm, you gotta play to it. There's a lot of best practices that comes along with it. I think what's special about Kickstarter is that it allows you to bring the community that you've already built in one place. And then also, once you get that virality on the platform and you get that engagement on the platform, it allows you to scale up exponentially. Like oftentimes we'll have people who have, $10,000 goals, and you'll see them raise $500,000 or $1 million+ because if you have a really great idea, it's very easy for that to scale up from there. So I don't think it's a replacement to the friends and family round. I think it's in addition to, it just gives you a platform to centralize that friends and family kind of round, but then also elevate beyond what you may raise through that round. And so I'm really excited too, and we can talk about it a little bit later, but I'm actually launching 2 new business lines actually to support more people in those efforts when they're trying to raise on Kickstarter as well, because we see that especially for people of color or people coming from different backgrounds, or if you don't have this built-in audience, it's really, really hard to always reach the amount of people that you need to, but also manage the business side of a crowdfunding platform, crowdfunding campaign as well. And so I'm really excited about that too.
Well, I was going to ask about that because obviously Kickstarter goes beyond, it's on the internet, so it goes beyond who you already know. So what is the new development that you guys are going to have to make sure that someone's idea reaches people in the most efficient way?
Well, this is first time on record. Well, second time technically, but first time because this really big podcast is coming out tomorrow that talks about it. But 2 things, digital marketing. And so my mentor is Chad Dickerson, who was a former CEO of Etsy, and their digital marketing business line has been exponential growth for the Etsy business. And so I'll be launching digital marketing for Kickstarter actually starting this week. And then the second thing is pledge management. So, before on Kickstarter, it was this, the pledge management side. Once you get all the money, all the people that want to support, people that want the product, Kickstarter's here's your money now, figure it out. We're bringing pledge management, so all the shipping, the taxes, the management of all the customers and the people that are supporting you, you'll be able to do that through Kickstarter. It's going to come in phases, but this is phase 1 of the launch. But also, another thing that you didn't get to participate in when you did that was that after the launch, there's still people that want to support you and still want the product. So this new product will extend beyond a crowdfunding campaign so that people that want to still support what you're doing or still want the product that you're creating will be able to do that. And we've seen that industry grow around Kickstarter, pledge management. People are making 30 to 50% more on average. So if you're raising $1 million, most people are raising $1.3, $1.5 million with the addition of pledge management.
Got it, and I think that gets at a really good point. It's once you get the financing, what do you do? And how do you then effectively grow your business? So is that what you guys are trying to solve for? Yeah,
we're trying to solve for, one, just giving support. To me, I'm a kid from Southside Richmond. I come from the hood. I remember seeing Kickstarter. I wouldn't know where to start with the Kickstarter. And so to be able to provide the tools for people to, one, be able to reach new audiences. I want it so that if you have a great idea, I don't care if you come from generational wealth or you're from the hood. If you're using a Kickstarter and you actually have a great product, a great idea, with the use of digital marketing, you should be able to scale that campaign and be successful. And that is the whole point in launching it. Also, we're gonna get to the bag too. It's gonna be a great business line for us too. And then on the pledge management side, again, it's supporting people who may not be as well versed in business or people who are doing these crowdfunding campaigns at scale where it gets overwhelming and you want to be able to manage all of those supporters and be able to get them products and things like that. And then also go beyond that which changes the ethos of Kickstarter a little bit. Instead of just being the place where you launch something, it's something that you can also continue to develop that brand.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And so we've talked a lot about like businesses broadly. So Rachel, I want to bring you into this since your research is at the intersection of business and race and innovation. So from your research, have you found that like Black-owned businesses, there's certain sectors that we like over-index in, and then also like are there higher rates of success for certain sectors where these businesses are? Rates of financing success.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were getting at. I can't say that I've seen, a lot of the work that we do, we're looking at sort of like average effects and that sort of thing. And even when we do sort of control for industries and so on, I can't say that I see, certain industries or where people are having necessarily better luck with finding financing. I think just on average across the board, what I've found, what I've seen in other studies is just very large gaps in access to financing. What I would say from just more general research on sort of drivers of success for entrepreneurs, I wouldn't necessarily sort of steer people towards one industry because that's where they're finding funding. I would say that, entrepreneurs, and I don't know, I could defer to some of the actual entrepreneurs on the panel here as well, but when we're looking at where folks are being successful, they're finding places where they have comparative advantage in the market. They've got an idea that's addressing a pain point that they can speak into in some kind of new and innovative way. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage people just to go follow the money if that's not sort of where they have an advantage in the marketplace.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I feel like a term that often comes up in conversations like these are impact investing, and often it goes with ESG. So, Roy, can you break down what impact investing is and how that financing works and why that might be a term that people are talking about more?
Yeah, so the way I typically start with the description of impact investing is I set the context and I say impact investing is like snowflakes. No two definitions are the same because everyone's got their different ideas of what they want to impact, number one. Number two, the spectrum of returns expectations is also broad. So the specific definition of impact investing that was put forward by an organization called the Global Impact Investor Network, the GIN, is an investment made with the intention of creating a positive social impact and a return of capital. And so it is left to one's risk appetite and returns requirements where they want to play. The Ford Foundation, the program I run, we can play along the entire spectrum. We have a couple different forms of capital. One is endowment capital, and if you all know how foundations work, grant making is the core business of the foundation. That grant making is powered by the endowment. And if you want to be a perpetual foundation, which many foundations are perpetual, that means you have a hurdle financial return rate. And that's typically the spend rate plus inflation because you generally want to maintain purchasing power. So by law, your spend rate is 5%. Ford Foundation spends more than that in most years. And inflation these days is pretty high, 8%. So that's a 14% off the bat return requirement. That's for the endowment capital. That's long term, so we live in up and down inflationary environments. But many foundations also have another form of capital that's called program-related investment, and that capital does not need to generate market rate returns because it's not technically endowment capital. So for the program I run, we can invest along the spectrum from just a return of capital or 0% expected return, because you never know what you're going to get until you get it, to the highest expected return venture capital firm. So that's the context I'll set for you.
I got something for you, brother. We need to talk. I got some.
Yeah, everyone does. Everyone does.
Roy, is it too simplistic to call it philanthropy?
How do I say this diplomatically? It's not only simplistic, it's incorrect. Philanthropy is at least my understanding, is grant making. Giving away money, that's a negative 100% return. So you've given money to an organization, you'll never see it again, and you hope you get some positive social impact. Impact investing, in the technical definition given by the GIN, you want your money back at a minimum, and you want a positive social impact, and you want a financial return. Let me give you an example that's relevant to this evening. We have an impact investing theme that's diverse fund managers. The way we came up with our investment themes is we looked for big social problems where we thought we could invest our money and make risk-adjusted market rates of return. So the problem we're looking at, and some of you may have heard this statistic, of the $80 trillion in assets under management by institutional investment firms, et cetera, in the US, 1.4% of that is managed by firms owned by women and people of color, combined. Women and people of color make up 70% of the population, control 1.4% of the capital. That's a big problem, because in a capitalist system, if you don't have access to capital, what you do have is a problem. And we're trying to solve that problem. The good news is you can make risk-adjusted market rates of return by investing in diverse fund managers. And so we're hitting a double bottom line objective. We're feeding the foundation's need for grant capital, and we're addressing a major, now we have a drop in the bucket compared to that 80 trillion. But our hope is that we can demonstrate action as opposed to admiration of a problem. We can develop proof points that we can talk about. And we have a motto on my team: we learn as we go and share as we learn. So whether it's successes or failures, we want everyone to know, because we want people to know what have we done right and what have we done wrong, so you can avoid our mistakes. Because the point is to harness the forces of capitalism to help provide a more inclusive system for everyone. Because when we all win, we all win. And there's been enough research out there that talks about how systemic barriers to access to capital holds the entire nation down. It's not a matter of, when you help in diverse fund, it's not just about black people, it's the entire nation. So it's patriotic if you think about it. So let me stop.
You were revving us up, so yeah. Denise, so when you were out looking for funding, as a business person, did it matter if you wanted grants, if VC? How did you even determine what type of funding you wanted?
If I'm being frank, I've gotten, thankfully, a lot more strategic and gotten more leverage in these discussions. But initially, I would take whatever capital I could get because I needed that to keep the business going. And so initially, it was Kickstarter. We went out to try to raise a friends and family round, and that term is very different when you have no accredited investors in your family. So it was my old colleagues, my husband's colleagues, $5,000 checks coming every few weeks. We were always about to run out of money, but I'm so grateful to those folks because that's what kept the business going. I set out to raise angel funding. I didn't know any angels either, though, but I knew that there was an angel group for kind of every affinity group. So, I'm from North Carolina. I went to UNC, Carolina Angels, and North Carolina, every group that I was somewhat tangentially connected to, I went to seek out those angel groups. I got about 100 no's. And through just getting more comfortable sharing my story with people, I got a connection to a venture fund called Marcy Venture Partners, which Jay-Z co-founded. They were the yes. That was a really interesting lesson for me because the 100 no's, half of them came back the next day and were like, oh yeah, and I was like, same founder, same story, same traction. This one group said yes, and now all of these folks are interested. And after that, that year, that was in the summer of 2019, at the end of that year, we were in about 350 stores, but the next year, we used that capital to grow to about 5,000 stores. We 10x'd our revenue, and then the conversation changed. We had groups approaching us in terms of wanting to invest, and we were able to be a lot more selective about who we brought to the table. And so I've tried to take a very inclusive approach, and so of the $19 million of outside capital we've raised, it's predominantly come from women, people of color, or funds that invest in those groups. Because for a multitude of reasons, I think when those fund managers, hopefully they have a successful investment in my business, and they can take those returns and go invest in more Black and brown and women founders, and I'm hoping that it just helps support a virtuous cycle that will start to close the racial wealth gap. It's like, to your point, Roy, small drop in the bucket, but like if everyone is doing their part, then hopefully we'll start to see some change.
And when you say angel investors, what do you mean?
I mean high net worth individuals, so folks who are accredited investors that can write checks, and that angels, I think, have a wide range of meaning, because it can be anything from a $10,000 check to a $2 million check, depending on someone's net worth, but it was high net worth individuals rather than funds.
And so oftentimes, so I'm a retail reporter, so oftentimes I'm writing about companies that you can go into a store and buy things, but a whole other sector of possible investments are like the B2B companies like the Oracles and things, Salesforce of the world is what I was trying to think of. But so I feel like this could be a question for anyone actually on the panel, but when you kind of think about that group of businesses, like where's the investment opportunity? How big is that? And like, I feel like when we're talking about, the audience as journalists, we don't write about that as much. And so maybe Everette, like.
I mean, I see a lot of people be successful. I've seen more people be successful. Like the one person that comes to mind, I think you know her as well, Savitra Wilson, of Brasilia. I think she's raised like 35 million in her last round, which is a B2B platform. And so I think B2B is always going to be interesting. I think from an investment standpoint, if you can gain traction, when you can have monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue. I think the hard part, I think, with B2B is getting the initial traction, because you have to get the initial traction for investors to really be interested. But if you're showing growth in MRR and ARR, I think it becomes a lot easier to get investment. And I think that's something that Savitra did, was that she put her own money up initially, got the traction initially, raised one round, got more traction, and then was able to raise the bigger round. And so I think with B2B, I think there's an onus on a lot of people to get that initial traction. But once you start to show growth in that revenue, I think it becomes a lot easier.
I think it's also interesting because there's huge opportunity there. Like if you can solve a problem, a back-end problem, and we B2B, business to business, if you can find a solution, there's huge opportunity because that can scale. So I think, just as we think about like possible stories, looking at those companies, looking at like what companies they're gonna solve problems for, I think that's really interesting.
It's not as sexy, but like, man, some of those B2B exits are really, really incredible. And so to me, I think it's a great way to go, and I would love to see more entrepreneurs of color and Black entrepreneurs pursuing B2B companies.
And also when we're talking about like growing companies, there's always like supposed to be an exit plan. It's supposed to be either you want to be sold to a company to be in-house, or you want to become publicly traded, and then you have public investors, but also the market's down right now, so maybe that's not the best idea. So what opportunities are there for Black-owned businesses that are looking to scale in this economic environment? How should we think about that?
I think the most important thing is building a sustainable, strong business that's solving a problem. The exit will come, whether that's to a private equity shop, whether that's going to the public markets, whether that's continuing to run the business, whatever that looks like. I think success looks different for every person, but if you build a strong business with strong unit economics, with a strong culture, with a good product that needs to exist in the world because it's solving a problem, like no matter if the market's good or down, there's a home for that business.
Couldn't agree more. And the interesting thing about the current environment is there is a significant amount of what we refer to as dry powder on the sidelines. So there's a lot of cash sitting and waiting to be deployed. And if you've got the type of company that you just heard, that's going to be able to, attract capital. And it can fuel an even greater exit because now you've got the capital to grow even more, and you're delaying an exit when the market is down, but now you're going to have a bigger customer base, revenue base when the market returns. And if the market doesn't return, well, we got other things to worry about. So,
All of us do. How would you, Everette, how would you kind of characterize the fundraising environment now? Obviously, you guys are at Kickstarter. This is the main business, but have you noticed a shift in?
Of course. First of all, like, white guilt is crazy. And like, over the past couple of years, and you saw it across different industries. I was, CMO of Artsy before, and you saw this spike in an investment in black art, especially black figurative art. And you had all these white people with like black people in their homes, and it was mad weird. But that was the thing. And then like you had all these like VCs and investors, and the hot thing was like, gotta find black people to invest in, make myself feel better so I can sleep well at night. And then you see the decline. You start to see the decline in the numbers, and I forgot her name. She's incredible, but she just wrote a story on this about the decline in investments now into black-owned startups. But there was just like this spike.
She might be in the audience.
She could be in the audience.
Oh, that was such a good article.
Thank you, Dom.
That was great. No, it was really, really great. And it's interesting because there's a shift overall right now in what we were just speaking about, in the sense of you got to build a real business now. And it's not just us, it's for everybody now. Like, you have to like have healthy margins. You gotta like profitability, and EBITDA is like finally a thing that's being talked about, and not just like high scale growth, where there was, for years, it was like people were like just losing and losing and losing money. And that's why, Denise, when you talk about an exit, if you're building a healthy business, if you can get to a point of profitability, or at least if you are having losses, it's controlled losses. Like, hey, we're dumping X, we're strategically dumping X amount of money into performance marketing, and we know if we pull back, we could be profitable tomorrow, type of thing. And so if you're able to do those things and have a real strategy behind your unit economics and the things that you're doing as a business, I think you'll be fine. But I'm not a VC, I'm not an investor, but the ones that I do speak to, that's what they're looking for now. They're looking for like actual healthy businesses, real businesses, profitability, or like a real, genuine, real road to profitability.
They want a path.
Yeah.
They want a path. And Rachel, so we're having this conversation, obviously in the backdrop of the summer of 2020, really jump-started this conversation. We're 3 years out from that. But I wanted to ask you, why often is it like a moment of crisis that fuels either the way that people want to change their financing, or honestly, innovation in companies?
I think this is one of the things I struggle with this question is, I look at a lot of the large data sets and try and understand what's going on at a macro level, even though I'm a microeconomist. But sometimes we can take certain statistics and sort of build a narrative around it. And a lot of the statistics that we use to talk about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship might just be looking at self-employed individuals, for example. And so there's been this number that has shown a large growth in self-employment post-pandemic, especially for Black folks, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's just been this assumption that these self-employed individuals are like the next Mark Zuckerberg. Mm-hmm. We have no idea if these people are selling Mary Kay or if they're coding in their garage, right? So I guess I caution folks to just assume that this means that there's all this innovation going on. One of the things when I was looking into some of the data that people were I think alluding to, sometimes it wasn't even cited. There's just like these headlines or whatever. Sorry. so that's the wrong.
Yeah, not the New York Times.
Not the New York Times. Bloggers and such. So there's this Kauffman Foundation report, and one of the things they look at is sort of an index, and they examine of the folks who have started businesses, what percentage of those do we characterize as what we would call opportunity versus necessity entrepreneurs? And when the main way that they measure it is whether or not you're coming from a sort of, I guess, a more positive employment situation. So maybe you've just graduated from school, or you've left your job to start a business because you've got some kind of opportunity, versus you're coming from a scenario where you've been unemployed, and so maybe you've just had rough time in the labor market, so you decided to go out on your own, right? And when I was looking at the data for 2020, yes, there's all across all racial groups, there's definitely a jump in the number of self-employed individuals, and it is definitely larger for African Americans, no doubt. But the share of those African American new business owners that are opportunity entrepreneurs is much smaller than for other groups. Mm-hmm. And so that gives me pause, right? Like, we want the kinds of things that this panel has been talking about. But sometimes when we latch onto a certain number, we can just have this narrative that everyone looks like what we've been talking about. And I get a little concerned that we're not maybe paying attention to some of the ways in which people are turning to self-employment, not because they've got some kind of great new idea, not because they found some pain point to address in the market, but because they just don't have the labor market opportunity. And when we see these trends, I also get concerned that we're not maybe going to focus as much on what some of these systemic barriers are, right? And maybe, as we've seen with the decline in the momentum that came after George Floyd, if we think, oh, well, we've got all these new entrepreneurs, we're doing really well, then there's a lack of momentum to try and actually address those systemic barriers, like the reason why you can't get a meeting with somebody until suddenly you've got these other funders in the room. What do we do to address those kinds of systemic issues? So I guess that would be my main sort of response to, we need to dig a little bit deeper into the data and understand what the underlying trends are, and give a little bit more attention, while we are celebrating the successes, to the very real realities of systemic barriers that are underlying some of the disparities we see.
And so it's opportunity, and what's the other?
Necessity.
Necessity.
Just defined differently between folks who are coming from maybe a more positive starting point, as opposed to people who may be turning to entrepreneurship because they don't have other options.
Got it. I want to remind you guys, we're going to have Q&A now, basically. One other question before we open to Q&A is, Denise, so you've been in business for 7 years, if I'm doing my math right. So as you kind of look at the landscape now, and you think about the entrepreneurs who are coming up behind you, do you feel like they have other opportunities to get financing that you just didn't in 2016?
Yes and no. So I had that idea in 2016. I left my job in 2017 to start. So I've been at it for 5 years, and I will say that, after George Floyd was murdered, I saw this influx of new fund managers. What I'm seeing now, though, is a lot of them are having a hard time raising a second fund, because just like a lot of Black founders I know and a lot of women founders I know who are not able to raise funding in this moment, and not because they don't have a fundable business, just because of other systemic issues. That's hitting a lot of Black and brown and women fund managers as well. And so I think when I talked about a virtuous cycle before, the opposite is what I'm seeing right now. So while there are presumably, I think the optics say, oh yeah, there's 100 new funds that are investing in Black and brown and women, what I'm hearing and what I'm really seeing at the ground level is, yes, my fund exists, but I gotta go raise fund 2 because I already deployed all my capital and I'm not really getting any call back, so I don't have any money to invest right now. And so I feel like there's a narrative that's painted that doesn't necessarily feel rooted in the reality that I'm seeing.
And just shed light on how much time does it take to raise funds? Like, when you say that,
I think it really depends on the person, the circumstance, their network. I will give myself as an example. To raise the seed round of funding, I started in earnest in the summer of 2018, and it took me a year to raise $1 million. I raised $5 million in 2 weeks in the end of 2020. So it just really depends.
Yeah. Do we have questions? Yes. Oh, we have questions? Yeah. Okay, I mean, obviously you in the back, you shot your head with the green, yeah, or, yeah.
My name is Charles Harrison. I'm here from Wells Fargo. Here with my colleague Caroline White, and we work in communications at Wells Fargo. And I am not speaking on behalf of the bank. Number one. But we have journalists. We hire journalists. We have economists. We have impact investing, ESG. We have innovation challenges. So I see connection points with everyone on the stage. But I'm thinking, while I'm here, while we're here, what ideas do you have that we need to take back to the bank to make a better impact for our community?
How much time do you have?
20 seconds. No, I'm kidding.
So I can just, much more of my research is focused actually on lending as opposed to the kinds of investments that we've been talking a lot about today. And there's just it's, the studies, the data, it's so ubiquitous, the differences in approval ratings, loan approval rates, even when we control for things like creditworthiness. There's this one audit study that took place it happened to already be going on, but it was still continuing during the pandemic, where basically a team of researchers, they had matched pairs of sort of, actors who had similar profiles as business owners. They sent black and white actors to retail banks to try and get loans, and they were able to document statistically significant differences in the way that they were treated by loan officers. So, whether it was being shown different products that have, different rates of interest rates, whether it was being offered assistance for, how to navigate the application process. There are a number of just very obvious differences in the types of information that was required for the black tester versus the white tester. And so I think, one of the things I'm increasingly interested in is what are sort of the institutional barriers to lending that are not so much about the things that we can always measure, but these sorts of intangible, interpersonal things that maybe are harder to see in the kinds of data that we generally collect. And so I would be really grateful to be able to talk more with folks who are in these lending institutions, just to understand a bit more about some of the ins and outs of how these decisions are made, and to what degree the discretion that individuals have might be embedded with certain types of biases.
Yeah, I think what I'd add is that having competent people who understand investing, who have an interest in addressing the needs of the underserved, will take you a very long way. I mentioned that 1.4% of all assets under management in the general market, the portfolio I'm responsible for, the figure is 63%. That's 40, 50x what the average is. And I'm saying that because I was seen as being a competent person who had an intention to use our capital, the Ford Foundation's capital, in a way that reflected what I referred to earlier as a patriotic value system. And when you have a strong value system, morals, Adam Smith talks about this in, the father of capitalism. Capitalism, morality go together as self-interest, and for us, patriotism. So I think a big part of this is picking the right people and having them in the right seats, and good things can happen.
Theory of moral sentiment is a lot of people think is his better work than Wealth of Nations.
I would agree with that.
We have a question from the live stream. So Denise, you talked about building a strong business that's solving a problem. What do you think are some other good examples of this? Or I guess this is for anyone. What are some other good examples of this? What business models did you look up to as you were building your business?
Business models that I looked up to when I was building my business. I think of Sarah Blakely, actually. I think what she was able to do with Spanx, while that isn't necessarily a societal issue that she was solving, she was able to have the gumption and resilience and determination and built a strong business that turned into a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar business that she bootstrapped and seemed to remain, at least outside looking in, like authentic and humble and wanted to do good for the world. The rest of the question was just businesses in general that I think are doing a good job right now.
Yeah.
I am particularly partial to the food industry, so I think there's a founder, his name is Ibrahim Basir. His company's called A Dozen Cousins. They have very wide nationwide distribution. He spent his career at General Mills working on brands like Annie's, but growing up as a black man in Brooklyn was like, these products don't represent what my family wants to eat, and so he makes a line of Afro-Caribbean inspired beans and rices with simple ingredients that can show up on Whole Food shelves, but are also price sensitive enough to be on Walmart shelves, and also has a really big give back component tied to it. I think of Savitra. I think she's another, she's an investor in my business actually, and so to see her solve a problem that, I think it's interesting because oftentimes people seem to get pulled into entrepreneurship because they want to get rich or build something sexy, and that is an example of just an under the radar company where she was like in a market. I think also oftentimes people think you have to be in New York or Silicon Valley or LA, like she's in New Orleans with her head down doing the work and has raised one of the biggest rounds, I think, if not the biggest round a black woman has ever raised, and then is using that money to invest in black and brown and female founders like myself. And so those are two examples.
Anyone else? You don't have to. Okay, we're moving. Let's go here.
Good evening. My name is Isaac Taylor. I'm with the Wall Street Journal. I was just wondering, what do you think is lacking in business journalism that you would like to see more of or see us cover more?
I'd love to see more of, like, I don't want to say the underdog, but feel like it's the same 10 founders I see. Like when somebody says it's Black History Month, I already know who I'm gonna see plastered everywhere. And there are so many great founders, and like and myself included, honestly. Like I think that I get a lot of coverage, and while I'm so appreciative of it, I know that there's other founders who are coming up, who are doing the work, who are building incredible businesses. And so I'd love to see a variety of coverage across multiple industries. It feels like consumer and tech are the two things that get the most coverage, but there's like other companies that are changing the world right now, and it's the same founders, I think, that continue to get talked about.
You answered that very fast.
So mad.
She knew. I'll harp on that too. Just being at Kickstarter has been really interesting to, like he just had a Forbes feature, but I met this guy, Javon Frazier, who like is doing like tabletop games, like that's so cool to me. Like he's built a multi-million-dollar business, and he was like the VP of marketing for Marvel Comics, and now he's like built this business. So there's like from games to fashion to CPG. Like I tell people all the time, like I see more success stories coming out of CPG than I see coming out of tech. And so there's just so many different avenues and spaces and different types of founders. And I think changing what we see as success, like, you know, building a venture capital business that is looking for $1 billion exit isn't the only success. Like I know founders that have built 20, 30, $40 million revenue businesses that are like flying under the radar. And so I would love to see more of that too, as well.
So what I would like to see is kind of a macro view that helps develop a narrative that is about, you know, we're all in this together and our fates are bound together. I remember seeing a cartoon by a guy named Herbert Bloch. I think it was done in 1961. It had two Olympic track runners. One of them had on their jersey USSR, the other was USA. USSR runner was edged ahead because the USA runner had something holding him back. It was kind of a little demon on his back, strangling him with the word racist written on the jersey of this little thing. And what that was, it's pretty obvious what that was saying, but the point, I keep hammering on this patriotism point. There's been study after study that talks about the removal of race-based systemic barriers and the power that would generate for the US economy and the importance of economic power, particularly at a moment like this when the world is really needs strong leadership, and so much of strong leadership is based on your economic power. And the idea that we're holding back $1.5 trillion, according to some estimates, I think it was B of A, I think McKinsey, they all came up with Citigroup. That's a lot of money, and it means a lot of opportunity that's been lost. So I'd love to see more narratives that hone in on, we all win when we all win. It is patriotic to help each other. When you're helping one group, Black people, you're not just helping Black people, you're helping everyone.
I would say there's two things that I would like to see covered a bit more. The first, I kind of already alluded to this. Sometimes I think there's like a statistic that I just see everywhere, and there's just this repeated story over and over about it. And there, if you need a friend who knows something about the data, call me. I mean, there's people, there's academics all over the place, people at think tanks who are in this data all the time and can help to give a bit more context about what's actually going on and not just sort of generalize to a larger population based on a single number. So I guess a little bit more context around the data that we're evaluating. And the sort of business reporting tends to focus a lot on the macro statistics and the macro trends. And there's not a lot. I mean, I wish there was more data, but we do have a lot of data that can tell us what's going on in the Black economy. We have data that can talk about small business owners. We have data that can talk about the self-employed individuals as well, understand their trends, understand what sectors they're in. So there's a lot of information out there that can help to paint a broader picture. And that sort of leads into my second point, which is there's like this narrative that drives me nuts that if Black people would just be more entrepreneurial, we wouldn't have as much of a racial wealth gap. And there is survey after survey that shows that when it comes to nascent entrepreneurs, people who are engaging in the beginning activities to try and start a business, Black people over-index on all of those surveys, right? So there's all of these people who are trying to start businesses and are not able to make it over the hump. And so some more reporting that helps people understand, one, that Black people are super entrepreneurial. And it's not for, there's literally an academic paper called Not for Lack of Trying. And so to understand and report on those steps that go from people who are in the beginning stages of trying to start and how those experiences differ between Black and white entrepreneurs and like who's able to get over that hump and actually make it successfully to entry. So those are the two things that I would love to see a little bit more coverage on.
I had some time to think.
Me too, I got another one too.
Writing story ideas and updating your whip list, because here we go.
Yours positive or negative? Because I don't want to sound.
Mine's kind of, it's somewhere in the middle. It's a one sentence though.
Go ahead.
I would love to see coverage outside of Black History Month on Black people. That's all.
That's a great one. I will forewarn that I may sound like a hater. But I think it actually hurts us. And like, I remember coming up as a tech entrepreneur, a Black tech entrepreneur, there's so many vanity articles about different founders that haven't really gotten any traction or really done shit. And I think it only hurts those founders, right? Like it only hurts them if like, and it hurts the other Black entrepreneurs because they see these founders or they see these business people who haven't really built real businesses, but they're on panels and they're in all of these articles and they're getting all of these features, but those aren't the people that, not to say that they can't get there, but I just see I see this happen all the time, and not necessarily from Black journalists, but like you see these Black entrepreneurs that are getting so much attention, and definitely want to spread the wealth, but I also think it's a bad example when we're giving this platform. So I know some of these people have the money to like hire PR firms and stuff like that, but be like, fuck no, I'm not gonna write about you. Like until you build something like reputable and gain traction and have something worthwhile. And I think it's really important to give people the platform when they're like trying to lift off, because that's really, really important. And I love the role that Black journalists play in that. But then after a while, it's like, okay, you gotta actually show me something. And so that's something, I'm not trying to sound like a hater, but I see so many entrepreneurs get down seeing other entrepreneurs that haven't really built anything get that type of attention. And I think there needs to be a shift.
I love a good media criticism.
Sorry,
Yeah,
just keeping it real.
criticism's not negative. Last time I raised, I called on someone. Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Renee Anque, and I'm here for CNBC Make It. And so the big buzzword lately is side hustles. And so I was wondering if you recommend people having them, and is it harmful or is it helpful to turn your hobby into a business?
1000%. Listen, like, yo, a business can be gone today, gone tomorrow. If you're a CEO, if you're a thing, like, look, I love Kickstarter, but at the end of the day, who knows what's gonna happen, right? Like, I've been in jobs where I felt like we're super secure and then things got shaky. And so I'm really supportive of that. At Kickstarter, we actually have a 4-day work week. Like, not a lot of, tech companies have a 4-day work week. And so that gives people the ability and the flexibility to like do different things outside of Kickstarter. And then also we are Kickstarter. So like that, we encourage people to have different things that they want to do. I'm never going to be reliant on one thing. Like I'm always going to have different things that I got that I want to have going on. Like I do a lot of different brand partnerships with different brands. I just did something with GM. I got something with Verizon coming out, and I get that in my contract. Like I'm still going to do these things, and I think it's really, really important to be able to still have those side hustles and encourage others to do so as well, because they're going to do it anyways.
Everett, you might have just recruited some people when you said 4-day work week. I saw some. So just know. Denise, were you going to say something?
Oh, I concur completely. When I was in my corporate career, I had 2 different side hustles, both like 6-figure side hustles, and I feel like I was still able to do my job very well. I didn't think either of them was something that I could turn into a scalable business, so I didn't want to leave my career, but I'm a big supporter of side hustles.
Yeah.
How you doing? I'm Jared Council. I'm the senior editor at Forbes The Culture. I got a question for Mr. Swan here. We've seen various reparations efforts in recent years, and not just those around writing a check for descendants of slaves, but also coming up with programs that can have an impact, right? Whether it's addressing a wealth gap or things of that nature. And since you're in the impact investing space, I'm just curious, what you think about some of those efforts, and what advice you would give, what words of caution you would give for not just governments, but also other institutions that have reparations efforts underway.
Yeah, reparations, conceptually, philosophically, has the weight of justice behind it. Politically, it's obviously a big challenge. And so I think the substance of the content that's involved in talking about reparations, which is a reminder of the historical damage that has been done. Even Harvard Business School has done a case note that traces, going back to, I think, the 1600s, all the land grants, the tax breaks, the reparations initially designed for freed slaves that were then given to former slave owners as compensation for the loss of their slaves. There's this long history, and if you don't have folks that are talking about the concept of reparation, including the fact that reparations have been given to many people all around the world, including in the US. If you lose that, that discussion, I think you lose some history. And there have been successes. You know, you see some of these schools that are providing reparations. California's got some kind of study group going on. So, you know, Martin Luther King was killed shortly after he started talking about reparations. And he even put numbers, I think at the time he talked about, he did some rough math, it was about $800 billion. And the value of people talking about the history and putting, you know, Bob Johnson just came out and said 14 trillion not too long ago. So I think there's a lot of value in having that discussion. And over time, you know, justice may prevail. We'll see how it goes. But in the meantime, we all got other work to do.
We have time for one more question. Maybe two.
I'll try to speak through. I don't have to stand, do I?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So my question is, I recently had a really compelling conversation on businesses that sort of maybe they're finally making maybe 500 per year and just kind of gaining momentum, but what takes them from a six-digit salary to a 7-digit? So Everette, I just wanted to maybe direct this to you and anyone else. Do you have financial experts so that when people do really hit big on your platform, that they really do have the support to multiply their money, understand the sort of, you know, tax ramifications, et cetera? So we just love a little tidbit on that.
Yeah, we don't. And just so you know, in all of Kickstarter was founded in 2009. In our entire history, we've only had one business line ever. In 4 months, I'm launching 2 new business lines. And so my point is to like innovate, right? And like one of the big things for me is also like creator resources and education. And that falls into that. So at some point we're gonna get there. I gotta obviously have prioritization first, but like that financial literacy part and helping people is something that I wanna get to in the future. It's just that I have so much I need to get done initially. Okay, cool.
Could I just say one real quick
Yes.
thing on that? I was just having this conversation in the context of minority and women-owned real estate developers in the city and what gets you from being able to do, you know, deals at one level and get to the next. And one of the conversations that were coming up for my Wells Fargo friends in the back was just the extent to which certain kinds of capital are available to you for doing projects versus enterprise work. Like what's gonna help you to actually, the capital that's gonna be available to you to actually begin to scale and not just what you need to do projects. I was just looking at some additional data that was showing just a disproportionate amount of the lending and various sorts of funding that Black-owned businesses acquire that has to go to operations. Like where is that extra amount of capital like that gives them the bandwidth to scale? And so that is something I think we need to be thinking about from a funding perspective. Is it's not just about the money that you can have to do your day-to-day and make payroll while you're trying to grow, but like can you then bring on somebody who's going to command a bigger salary so that you can, you know, grow to that next level? And so where is the funding that's specifically available to help people scale in that way?
I'm so sorry, Sandman is coming. I hope you guys get the reference, it's Apollo. I have to stop here, but I hope you guys stay around to ask the panelists some one-on-one questions. Please help me thank them for all of their insights. Thank you, Rachel, Roy, Everette, Denise. Thank you
And our
so
host,
much.
give it up for her as well.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And we'll bring you back in not February.
Yeah.
We'll do that. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Sorry, I should have flagged that. There's one other thing. That's why the Sandman came, to bring other people. So please stay seated. I forgot that prompt.
Thank you for the great questions, everyone, also, since I'm sitting on the stage alone now. Me and you. Yeah. Round two.
Thank you, Jordyn.
No problem.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
That was really fascinating and smart, and it's all of the reasons that Jordyn Holman works at the New York Times. She knows so much about what she does. Well, let me introduce everyone here. Okay, Jordyn, obviously you know now. With me is Ellen Pollack, who is the business editor of the New York Times. She has worked here, as she told me this morning, 5 years, 9 months, and 7 days. I think we're almost on to day 8. And before she was here, Ellen was editor of Bloomberg Business Week, and she was an editor at Business Week before it was at Bloomberg, and she was an editor at the Wall Street Journal. And immediately to my right is Preeta Das, who is our finance editor. She's been here for 3 years.
2 days short of 3 years.
2 days short of 3 years.
Just counting.
And prior to this, she was at the Wall Street Journal, where she was deputy business editor and also a finance reporter. And Preeta is currently writing a book about Bill Gates. Do we know yet?
What, when it's out?
Yeah.
Maybe summer 2024, but publishing deadlines are long, unlike journalism deadlines, so.
Okay, well, and I should introduce myself. I'm Mohammed Hadi. I'm a deputy business editor. Here, I have been here for 5 years, almost. And I have also worked at Business Insider and Bloomberg and Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Not exactly in that order, but so we're here to talk about careers, how to think about your business career as a business journalist, and how to get to the Times. And so I want to start with, I'm going to ask each of you kind of the same question, but I've got a slightly different version of it. Ellen, will you tell us about your career path to this point, and the version of the question for you is did you set out to be a business journalist, and what would you tell your 25-year-old self or what would your 25-year-old self tell you now if you said to her, hey, you're going to be business editor of the New York Times?
Well, I would never have guessed that I would end up business editor of the New York Times. And when I started in journalism, I knew nothing about business at all. So I got out of college. I could only afford to eat bagels and with cheese, Munster cheese on them. And my first job was as a researcher for a guy writing a nonfiction book about Rolling Stone magazine. And then I kind of oozed my way onto a magazine, a general interest magazine that he wrote for, that quickly folded. And then I ended up at the American Lawyer magazine, which was a sort of a feisty trade magazine about lawyers. And basically, it was a business magazine, and I knew nothing about business at all. I used to read the wedding announcements in the New York Times because I had no idea what people did for a living, because my parents were teachers. So I would look and say, okay, what's marketing? I had no idea, but that's why I read the wedding announcements. And I didn't know the difference between revenue and profit. I had no idea what a company was, nothing. I mean, really, I was kind of an idiot. So I learned some of that at the American Lawyer, and I stayed there for a really long time. I was insecure, a horrible writer, I was sort of a good reporter, but I stayed for a long time. And then eventually, I kind of learned some of those things. I really taught myself to write by working with an editor who really had a lot of patience with me, but I realized I wasn't a good writer. I started taking apart my writing paragraph by paragraph. And then eventually I ran a spin-off of The American Lawyer. I was the editor. And then a lot of people from that publication were going to the Wall Street Journal, and I went too. So when I started at the Wall Street Journal, I thought, this place is stodgy and I am not going to stay. So I thought, I'll stay for a year and then I'm gone. And I ended up staying for 18 years. And by the end of the 18 years, I kind of could pretend that I knew a lot about business, but basically I just learned as I went along. And business journalism is just like journalism. You can do a story on candy hearts, and you don't know anything about candy hearts, right? But you learn it, you learn it because that's your job as a reporter. And that was the way I sort of approached business journalism. It was journalism, and I just learned a lot as I went along. And I came to love it because I think writing about money and power is really interesting and really matters. And that's sort of how I kind of got started. I ended up the deputy page one editor at the Wall Street Journal, and then went to Business Week, and then came to the Times.
Thanks, Ellen. Preeta, same question for you, but I think I want to know about making the switch from reporting to editing, and when to decide to do it, and how to know it's the right thing to do, but tell us the whole.
Sure.
Tell us the whole story.
Well, I didn't set out to be a business or financial journalist at all, but the way I came to it was I didn't grow up here. I came here for school. I was looking for scholarships. I won a Reuters scholarship. They recruited me. Reuters was largely doing finance and business news, and that's how I got my start in 2007. And one thing led to another, and I've been mostly in finance and business journalism since then, mostly in finance, a little bit of business. And most of that has been as a reporter, but to Mo's question, I got pulled into editing, and I didn't, I kind of felt my way along. I mean, I was grasping blindly, how do you do this? But you just learn on the job, and hopefully I've gotten better over time. But it's quite you do have to switch gears. When you're reporting, you're just searching for information nonstop, and you're trying to make sense of it. As an editor, you're presented with that information, and then you have to kind of try to understand how to frame it. What is the story really saying? And you have to, I think being presented with the material gives you a different set of challenges. Like seeing my own reporting and seeing what I might have done as an editor, it's quite interesting to see the reporting me versus the editing me. But I think if I were to go back to reporting, I would be a better reporter because of my editing. So I think the two things are very intertwined. I would recommend editors try reporting and reporters try editing, if possible.
Would you be able to manage yourself, your reporter self?
I'm afraid the Chinese wall in my head doesn't go that high, but probably not.
Okay.
That's why we need managers.
Okay, Jordyn. Tell us about your time at Bloomberg. Tell us about what happened before, and then tell us about when you knew it was time to make a switch and how you knew that.
Yeah, so I started my career at Bloomberg as a baby intern and did a whole lot of different beats. So covered muni bonds, covered insurance, covered diversity management, all that kind of stuff. And so I always approach my career like I always want to learn something new. I want to try something new, doing video and TV and podcasts and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think when it comes to switching jobs and kind of doing a gear shift, obviously one is super personal. It's a lot of thoughts and reflection of self. But it's also like a question of like, where am I trying to grow? What strengths or skills do I want to develop? And then having conversations with other places, like seeing if they're aligned in that way. And so I think that was like a huge part of my process. But realizing like whenever you switch a job, it is a bet on yourself, which can feel very, very scary, but also it has like high reward. Like once you can go someplace else and be like, okay, I can still do this. Like I can see where my strengths are. I can meet new people and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I approached it.
And she grilled us. I mean, really, I don't think she was interviewing us. She grilled us.
Yeah, you guys should do that. So anyone, like, yeah, because that was a whole other thing. Like when you come from a place that you're comfortable and you very much know the inner workings, you need to like understand what you're stepping into and seeing how people respond to grilling.
Did I do okay?
Yeah, I was like, oh wow, she was intense too. We're both intense over that Google Meets. So that's what I would say.
Okay, and what about how your job has, like fundamentally, you're a reporter before, but what's one of the biggest ways your job has changed coming to the Times from a newsroom like Bloomberg?
A lot of ways. Like my day fundamentally looks different. I feel like being at the Times is like a lot of ideation and like really taking that space and time to like report the heck out of it. Maybe it doesn't show up in the paper or online the next day because it's like, oh, like keep digging. I'm not sure if that's a story yet. Like I'm not sure if that reaches the bar, and that can feel very jarring because like I think any journalist can relate with the being like seeing your byline feels like the productivity, and it's like, okay, I did something. And so like just kind of getting used to kind of a longer process of reporting and kind of thinking of stories in a different way, maybe more holistically. I would also say like for my job, I'm really used to covering companies and just like saying very narrow on this is what Macy's did, this is how the earnings, and even today, I covered retail sales. I never covered retail sales, but I'm like, wait, that makes so much sense as a retail reporter to like talk macro about what's happening in the economy. So it's just also, I feel like I'm getting some blinders taken off. It's just like I get to shape how I'm thinking about this beat and very much throwing ideas out at my editor and it's like seeing what lands, and it's just like blue sky. It's like, okay, go do that. I know you've never done that. Come back if you have questions. Like, it's cool.
It's a little unnerving though.
Extremely, extremely, but the high reward, like high risk,
Also
high
liberating,
reward.
I guess.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's liberating, yeah.
Ellen, when it comes to the different newsrooms, you know, that you've worked in and the different readers that you've written or edited for, could you walk us through a little bit of the difference? I mean, you weren't in the same part of the Bloomberg newsroom, but you definitely were at Bloomberg. But also the Wall Street Journal and the Times. How is it different? How are the readers different? How does that affect the way you look at stories?
So I've thought about this a lot. I've been lucky enough to, to provide journalism to some great audiences, but they've been different. So I would say that at Bloomberg, as a journalist, I mean, basically you are helping your reader make money. Bloomberg has, for the most part, has clients, and they are reading your stuff because they want to figure out, they want to use it to make money, and that is what the service is about. The journal is for a business reader. It's a general business reader, and the readers are reading your stuff because they need to know about business. They may not need to. They may be reading widely in the paper, but they need to know in general about business, and they need to be highly educated about business. With the Times, I think you're really writing for a general reader. I always think of my reader at the New York Times as being my mother. My mother was a teacher. She was really smart. She had 2 master's degrees. And although she did not think of herself as a Wall Street investor, she was, because she had a pension that was invested in Wall Street. And my view is that New York Times readers are reading you for a variety of reasons, but that they are smart, they are curious about the world, and they are reading you so they understand money and power and business because they should. And so it's a great audience. It's a general audience. We assume that our readers are smart, smart in different ways, but smart, and mostly they're very curious about the world. And so that's how we are approaching them. We're giving them sophisticated information, but we don't expect them to be as immersed in business as a Bloomberg reader.
So I'll ask.
And I have to say, the general reader is a really fun reader to be writing for.
How so?
Just because you know that they want the information, and it's a challenge because sometimes business is complicated, and you need to write it so it's accessible, but you don't want to talk down to your reader. So you want to take the reader by the hand, but you don't, you want to treat them with great respect. And it's important, and you need to, they know it's important, and it's a partnership between you and the reader. It's a challenge, but it's a really fun one.
And I also think it's like a cool place to be, because it's like, this is me talking to the reader. Like, you might have seen this happen in the world, and I'll connect the dots for you. And so then the engagement from those type of stories just feels different. It's like people like really writing you full emails about how they feel about this, or like, oh yeah, I noticed that, I didn't see that. And so I think that's one of the upsides that comes from a general audience.
Also, I would just say that it's really tough to write simply. I mean, it's such an act of interpretation and translation, especially for what I do, which is finance. There's a lot of arcane stuff that you can't assume that your reader knows that. So you really have to break it down in an accessible way. So that is a challenge, but it's also very clarifying, because you have to know what you're talking about to the best extent possible. Otherwise, you can't write it simply. So I just think that's a really good challenge for all business journalists in general, just learning how to write simply and clearly and directly.
And it's hard, but of course we all got into this business because we liked hard stuff. So that makes it sort of fun.
Okay, so Preeta, sort of a follow-on. When you're talking to reporters, or when you're considering reporters to hire, right? What are some of the sort of key characteristics that you're looking for when it comes to saying this person can do the job that you just described?
Passion and just enthusiasm for stories. And then just story ideas. I mean, someone who's bubbling with story ideas is just such a great person to meet. And I think that enthusiasm is infectious, and it helps you engage with that person. So I definitely look for that. But also just someone who I think will be collegial. I think that's really important to any team, because you want to have those joint ventures and collaborations that produce really good stories. So, and these are hard things to assess in a first meeting or second meeting, but I think all of us have to trust our instincts, and they can sometimes go wrong, so hiring is hard. But I think I would just say a passion and enthusiasm for the subject matter, a kind of an open, curious approach, and a level of collaboration and collegiality. And I'll ask those questions to see how they think about that. So those things are important to me. Hiring, sure.
So, well, I'll come back to the sort of where we started. We have a lot of colleagues who did not start at all in business and spent many years doing things other than business. How important is it for people to be working as a business reporter as opposed to a reporter?
I don't think, I mean, obviously, we have a, a pretty big department, and we need people who understand business in it. But I don't think you absolutely have to be an expert in business. I think you have to love reporting. And that is sort of the main thing. And again, like, you need some people who, know business. But one of our senior economics reporters, who is now in London as our sort of global economics reporter, was an editor in our culture department. I mean, she didn't start out as a business reporter at all, but she, she's fantastic at it. She's curious. She knows how to report. She's cultivated sources, and she's not afraid, right? She's not afraid of complicated information. So if you're into reporting and you're not afraid of complicated information, and it's not that complicated, I mean, if I can understand it, like, it's not that complicated, then you're gonna be fine. I mean, and again, you have to start somewhere. I knew nothing. I could not even add. And and I learned it, but I learned it because I loved to report. And so I think the loving to report is really the most important thing. Like, I sit kind of near Jordyn, and I sometimes, like, I don't do this too much, but I eavesdrop, and I'm like, a little bit, and I'm like, that's a woman who loves to report, right? You can tell, and it's fun.
Thank you. Like, my screen faces you, so I'm just like typing and looking productive. But I do love to report. Yeah. Just, that's my secret to you.
That's fine. That's fine. It's working.
Okay.
So we are, we're about out of time. I don't know if there's any questions. We could probably take a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I see you there.
Wait, I had trouble hearing that question.
So how do you think about business and global coverage and reporters outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, particularly at the New York Times Foreign Bureau.
How do we feel about business coverage outside the U.S.? So we, the New York Times has reporters all over the world. We have a bunch that are devoted to business coverage. They're sort of scattered. We have some in Asia. We have some in Europe. I wish we had more. What they're covering, varies depending on what's going on in the world at the moment. We have a dedicated tech reporter in Europe, and we have a dedicated tech reporter in Asia. But right now, if you look at what our business reporters are covering in Europe, it's the European economy, and in light of the Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and the crunch in energy. Like, that's, we have people sort of, focused on that. In Asia, we've devote a lot of energy to covering business in China. If I had more reporters, the first place I'd put business reporters would be in Africa. But our general international reporters do a fair amount of economics and some business as well. I mean, I think it's going to be increasingly important to us.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Christopher Brooks. I'm a reporter for CBS News. But one of the other things that I do on the side is I'm an adjunct professor, and I actually teach an introduction to business journalism class. So my question is kind of off to the side to this. If there were 3 core skills that you would eventually hire one of my students for, when I go into this semester, what are those 3 things that I should just hammer into them over the next 16 weeks to make sure, above all, at least you can do this, this, and this? You know what I'm saying? What if, for each of you, what would those 3 things be?
Sourcing. I mean, just the ability to cultivate sources. Like that's, to Ellen's point, I mean, subject matter is great, but like if you are a reporter and you have the right instincts and your ability to source up, even on a breaking news, and it's a big breaking story, like some people just have the ability to do it, and some people, build an extensive roster of sources through the years, and you just never know when. Because people are not, they're multifaceted, right? Someone who is in a bank might also be a big player in their community, and so you use them for different reasons. So it's good to keep up with people, but the ability to source and to build a healthy, thick source, like contact list, I think, to me is probably the most essential. I don't know if
I was going to say turning in clean copy. Like,
yes.
It was funny when you were talking about like being an editor, because I once had an editor say she didn't realize how sloppy people could be until she became an editor. And so like, that's real. Like just being the ability to write quickly, fast, cleanly, get your point across, because that just like saves so much time in the back end editing. And it just shows people that it's all the positive skills, that you pay attention to detail, you're a good writer, all of that kind of stuff. I think that's key.
I have one, and then I think our time is up. But I would say being able to translate jargon into plain language. It doesn't matter what, it's specific to business, but I'm sure that if we were science editors, we'd be saying the same thing. Like finding a way to explain that thing in plain language, and it's hard, and it's kind of it will give you an edge, because it comes across that as Prita said, you have to first know it, and then you can say, okay, look, here's how I can talk about it. Okay, well, thank you all, and thank you to the NABJ, thank you to Keiko for organizing this. It's been a fascinating evening, and I hope we can do it again.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.